trying to figure out a better way. Oh, that looks a little, I mean, well, I got flowers in my hair still. Oh, well, I can move that maybe.
Okay, so it looks like we're live here.
Okay.
Okay, so welcome everybody joining us here to our Nature in Our Backyard. We have guest here, Michael Runtz, naturalist, and he's going to talk a little bit about some of the nature you might find in your backyard. And if you want to comment some questions, then Michael will answer them at the very end. So Michael, you can take it away.
Okay, let me just get my PowerPoint up here. And you probably can't see it yet, can you? So I got to share screen. It says you disabled my, okay. Can you see my screen, Sarah?
No,
Hello?
not yet. Not yet.
Okay, it says host disabled my screen sharing. Can you open it?
Try that now, Michael.
Okay. There we are. I think that's going to work. And oh, where's my PowerPoint now? Okay, can you see my opening image? Are we good to go?
Good to go.
Okay, good, excellent. Well, welcome everybody. It's nice to get back to the valley again, where I'm now living in Arnprior with Britta, and so talking about nature and our backyards. Your backyard, my backyard will be the same thing. First off, far too many people think that to see nature, you have to go to some remote place where there's continuous forest and no roads and winding creeks and so on. And while there certainly are animals there that you'll encounter that you may not see in your backyard, like moose, for example, or although, mind you, around the Pembroke area, moose may be possible in your backyard. But generally, for most people in backyards, you don't get moose or don't get eastern wolves. And therefore, because you don't get these animals that are assumed to be, symbols of the wild, that backyards are boring and lacking nature. But anything but that is the truth. And even black bears do occur occasionally. I'm sure many of you in the Pembroke area have certainly had black bears in your backyard. But generally, these are animals that people think they have to drive to some distant location, to some wilder area to encounter. But backyards themselves are intriguing habitats, and they host a huge diversity of living things. And many are as fascinating, if not more so, than large animals like wolves and bears and moose. So let's take a peek in the backyard. And backyards certainly vary a lot, don't they? And there was a study done in Ottawa a few years ago, looking at large green spaces in cities, like big parks, versus backyard diversity, and seeing what was more important. And surprisingly, it was found that backyards host an equal or greater biodiversity than large green spaces do. So they're equally, if not more important to have. And let's see what we could find in our backyards. Well, certainly some of the birds are familiar to everybody, and American robins are just returning now. And they find in the urban habitat not only a place to find food, especially earthworms, which, by the way, are not native to Ontario. All our earthworms were destroyed by or killed off by glaciation 10,000 years ago, and all the earthworms we have now are not native. So these robins are exploiting a resource that wasn't here shortly after glaciation until humans began to release worms into the wild. And of course, backyards also offer nesting habitat for American robins. They find food and shelter there, as do a number of birds you're very familiar with. American crows, for example, have done very well in the urban habitat. And then we can enhance what we see in our backyards. There's some things that are given, like robins and crows, perhaps. But then by planting trees that offer flowers in spring, we can attract a variety of living things, some small like insects, but others large like cedar waxwings. They'll actually eat apple blossoms when they first arrive. And if you plant trees that have flowers, like cherry trees, for example, they produce fruit. And that fruit is food in the fall for birds like cedar waxwings or for migrating birds. A lot of birds do eat fruit. So what you have in your backyard can attract a certain type of bird. Now, sumacs are somewhat invasive, so perhaps not the best one to have, but it's a good food because a lot of birds like gray catbirds do eat it. But more popular than sumac, of course, are shrubs and trees that produce spectacular flowers and then fruit. And mountain ash is one of these. And mountain ash, when it has this copious amount of fruit in late summer and the fall, is food not only for robins, of course, but other birds as well. And by the way, robins eat a number of types of fruit in the fall, not just earthworms in summer, but they'll go for mountain ash and they'll go for junipers as here as well, as will cedar waxwings. So trees that bear fruit like berries can attract a number of things. And in winter, we have Bohemian waxwings coming down here in some years, and they love fruit trees. And so backyards often harbor not just cedar waxwings, which will eat fruit. And by the way, when they see a fruit, they first look for the size of fruit they want to grab. They select, then they raise it up, and they often toss it in the air first to swallow it whole. And they have really large openings to the bill, the gape, for swallowing fruit whole. And boy, can they process these things quickly. Here's a Bohemian doing the same thing, giving this case, a buckthorn berry, a toss in the air before it's swallowed. And even the thing as large as a larger fruit, a small apple, a crab apple, for example, they can swallow whole, and they can poop out the seeds in 20 minutes flat without the aid of Metamucil or anything else like that. Here's an example how wide that mouth opening is. Again, Bohemian. Bohemians have this nice rusty red under the tail and not the yellow on the breast that cedars have. And Bohemians have much more color in the wings too. The fruit also attracts a number of small other animals, including eastern chipmunks, which, by the way, often go to cherry trees. Here's a choke cherry, and they seem to devour the fruit, but they actually don't want the soft part, the pulp that we enjoy and that waxwings enjoy. They want the pits inside to store for winter. And they stuff their cheeks just so full of these things to take underground to their chambers for winter consumption, because they do awaken every few days in the winter and go to their stores and eat and go to their lavatory and do what's necessary there. By the way, when you plant fruit trees in the backyard, you can attract expected things, but then also the unexpected can occur too. This is down near Toronto a few years ago, but this bird is a phainopepla from Arizona, and it wandered northeast instead of southwest for the winter, and luckily survived the entire winter feeding on fruit in someone's backyard. If you have trees that produce nuts, like acorns, for example, or hickory nuts or whatever, a number of animals eat those, eastern chipmunks included. Gray squirrels will not only eat the acorns later on, but also the flowers of the oak trees in springtime. And by the way, gray squirrels were not found in Ontario, at least this far north, until about the 1920s. They began a northern movement. And one reason was because people were planting Manitoba maples, also called box elder, in their backyards, a very popular tree for planting. And this brought squirrels north. And gray squirrels come in two colors, the black color and the gray color. But up here, the northern part of their range, there's more blacks and grays. And as you go farther south, there's more grays than blacks. And maybe the black can absorb more solar energy on those cold winter days when the squirrels are still active. And then now and again, you get these odd colorations of gray squirrels. This one's, or a mixture of colors sometimes. This one's this beautiful blonde color. not very commonly seen in gray squirrels. And apparently not only is it a rare color, but apparently these blonde squirrels have a lot more fun than the other squirrels do. By the way, I love these squirrel-proof bird feeders that some of you probably have. This squirrels learn that if you stand on the weight-activated hinge here, you can't get seeds. So you stand below and put your hand inside and get seeds. They're very clever animals, aren't they? By the way, if your backyard has coniferous trees that have cones, or is near a place that has cones, you'll have red squirrels too. And red squirrels have also learned that bird feeders can be resolved quite nicely. Very clever animals, these tree squirrels, whether they're gray or red. Another backyard habitat that's great for animals are the gardens. People love color and love colorful flowers. And if you want to see a dynamic ecosystem, go to a patch of garden flowers. And it's amazing because you have these flowers behaving as wild plants do. They produce nectar usually and smells to attract their pollinators. And so you got this plethora of animals that come to receive their sweet reward, usually nectar from the flowers. And in the process, they pass the pollen around and pollinate the flowers. And there's so many butterflies that go to backyards. It's one of the best places for seeing butterflies, actually. Everything from painted ladies. And we have a southern butterfly, the giant swallowtail, that has spread north in recent years. It's as far as Arnprior and Ottawa, and perhaps in Pembroke too, if you have prickly ash growing in the area. The caterpillar feeds on that. And you have this day-flying moth that behaves like a hummingbird, called the hummingbird Sphinx Moth or the bumblebee Sphinx Moth. They come to flowers and gardens as well. And if you have milkweed, you'll certainly have monarch butterflies. Now, a lot of people don't like milkweed because it's called an invasive weed by some people, or a noxious weed. But really, it's a beautiful wildflower, highly complex, and a great, great wildflower for attracting insects, especially butterflies, including monarchs. We have the day-flying moth, the hummingbird Sphinx moth, coming to get nectar from the milkweed. Or how about this crane fly? Resembles a giant mosquito, but it's not. They don't bite us, thank goodness, because they have a long proboscis and they're very large, but they don't actually take blood. They just go for nectar. The flowers of milkweed are really complex. If you examine one closely, you'll see it's got these horns here that lead down to where the nectar is in the cups. But between the horns are these little groove structures. These are where an insect's leg goes into. And when the leg goes in, a snare is attached to it, and that snare contains bags of pollen. It's like a little saddlebag of pollen. It clamps onto the leg of the insect, gets pulled away with it, and deposited in another milkweed flower that's lost its saddlebags of pollen. Really neat. See here, the foot's gone down. It's missed the groove, but this one obviously hit it. Here's the groove here where these pollen sacs lie. And here's a crab spider ready to grab the honeybee in case you didn't see it. Now, by the way, some insects are weaker than the larger butterflies and so on, and they can't pull these pollen sacs out. If you examine milkweeds closely, you will find insects that have their legs stuck in the groove and the saddlebag attached to it, and they're either dead or dying. It's all part of nature. Of course, monarch butterfly caterpillars eat milkweeds, their sole type of plant, and get a great defense chemically from it. Hence their bright colors that tell birds they're bad to eat. And there are a number of animals you'll find eating the leaves of milkweeds with impunity, because these contain a heart poison, a cardiac glycoside is called, that tastes very bitter. It's a terpenoid, and most animals don't like that. But a few have evolved ways of absorbing the poison into their own body to use as a defense. And these are usually brightly colored, like the monarch butterfly caterpillar. It's a tiger. This is a tiger moth, the milkweed tiger moth. And again, the bright coloration says I'm bad to eat. As are these milkweed bugs that are playing a little game here, it looks like. And even hummingbirds are drawn to milkweeds for nectar too. So these are the great flowers to have if you don't mind them spreading a little bit in your backyard. If you can plant red flowers, however, they will attract hummingbirds. And cardinal flowers are very hard to grow, but some people do if the moisture in the ground, enough sunlight. But other red flowers like bee balm will do as well, but beware of bean balm. It's a little bit invasive as well. Not many birds or insects actually go to dandelions. Some do, but it's a pretty flower to have. But there are some things you don't want to have in your backyard because they can spread very readily. And by the way, dandelions are so successful, aren't they? Give them a chance in your backyard and they'll take over. Amazing flowers. But there are controls for them, natural controls. Groundhogs eat them, grazing the leaves here of dandelion. And black bears love them in spring. So why hire a weed destroyer, a person who kills weeds or use poisons in your lawn to get rid of dandelions? Just let a bear come in or a groundhog come in and they'll take care of that job for you. But there are lots of other insects on flowers too worthy of our attention. There are the insects coming for the pollen and for the nectar especially. Then there are the predators that eat them. And there are a number of flies called robber flies that have incredible eyes and great eyesight. And they inject a poison into their prey before they suck out the juices from it. Some look just like bees or wasps, these incredible mimics of those animals. And when they this one's grabbed a special kind of wasp, they will use their long proboscis and stab it and then inject into it their poison that kills it, and also some enzymes that break down the inside to a milkshake. And they sit there then and suck out the juices. And they're fairly common in gardens, different types of robber flies. And look how strong it is. One little claw here of its toe on this fern frond, and it's hanging onto that, holding another animal in its arms while it enjoys its meal. Phenomenal flies, the robber flies. Of course, there's other predatory animals too, like praying mantids that may appear in your backyard to visit. And then there are other types of animals that don't eat their prey outright, but lay their eggs in it while it's still alive for their young to eat. These are wasps called ichneumon wasps, and there's smaller ones called braconid wasps. And they are very specialized for certain groups like caterpillars or even spiders by some. And they'll lay their eggs inside it, but when the eggs hatch, the larvae eat the caterpillar while it's still alive, and then finally they'll eat through the skin, the outer layer of the animal, and spin a cocoon around themselves and pupate inside there, then emerge as flying wasps. And can you imagine this caterpillar, the Sphinx Moth caterpillar, had about 100 of these little aliens living inside his body, devouring it while it's alive. If you ever saw the movie Alien with Sigourney Weaver, that was a big breakthrough movie. Wow, a horror movie with this animal inside. In nature, these stories are commonplace. And then you'll find often strange animals in the backyard. This is like a hybrid between a wasp and a praying mantid. It's called a mantis fly. And these are seen in our area occasionally in our backyard. The more you look at flowers in your backyard, the more things you will discover. A very common predator that hides on flowers is the crab spider. And there are a number of species. And these often blend in beautifully with the flower, and they don't move. They hold their legs out there. They wait for a fly or for a butterfly to come in, and they grab it, and then they give it a lethal bite, and then mush it up and suck out the juices. And they can blend in so well with the flower's colors and even shapes. This one is really common in backyards. It's called the goldenrod crab spider, but it's found on many garden flowers, not just on goldenrod. And it has the amazing ability to change its color from this beautiful white with red markings to yellow. So it can be yellow on certain flowers and white on other flowers. Just a remarkable ability to camouflage itself very well. We also have spiders, of course, in backyards that build webs. And you don't really see these webs until early in the morning when there's dew on them, because they absorb moisture from the air to remain elastic, or they would just dry out and snap. And the most beautiful webs are made by the orb weavers. And these webs of silk are incredibly strong. They can stop a flying dragonfly or even a small flying bird like a hummingbird or even a warbler. They are remarkable lethal traps that are called flight intercept traps because they intercept the animal while it's flying. And by the way, there's a great variety of orb weavers. If they hide on the side of the web, maybe under a rolled leaf, if you shake the web gently with a little, leaf or something, they often come running out. And many have these beautiful patterns on them. Look at this. Remarkable. One backyard spider that's really obvious to the eye that doesn't hide in a rolled up leaf is this spider commonly called the black and yellow argiope, or commonly called the garden spider. And they sit in the middle of the web and sit there in broad view, plain view in broad daylight. In the middle of the web is this really weird thick strands of silk that are quite obvious. And it's believed, well, it's known actually, that this special silk here and the spider itself reflect ultraviolet light, making patterns visible. Many insects that go to flowers for nectar are guided by ultraviolet patterns that the flower throws out at the insect's face. And so when an insect comes in, it thinks it's going to a flower for reward, and it ends up being the reward for the incredible spider that lies there. Pardon me. Anyway, these orb webs are beautiful structures, and they are works of art. And again, when there's morning dew on these webs, boy, they really stand out. There's also predators on the ground. Many of you have seen, and especially in spring, these incredible metallic green beetles that'll run and fly a short piece and then start to running again. These are tiger beetles. And this one's called this six-spotted tiger beetle. And they have incredible mouth parts for grabbing and tearing apart the prey they capture, these beautiful serrated mandibles. Here's another species showing a better view, perhaps, of those mouth parts they use to capture and shred their prey. And they are visual hunters, huge eyes for doing so. At night, there's a counterpart called the ground beetles that come out, and they hunt more by smell. And they can actually track slugs and snails by their slime trail to eat them, to find them to eat them. Those are the ground beetles. The tiger beetles are daytime hunters that hunt by sight. And of course, there's larger animals too that get active at night that come out to hunt things in your garden. That's the American toad, with a real bad attitude, it looks like. We can also attract nature to our backyard. We can certainly plant things that have flowers and plant gardens and so on. We can also feed animals too. And hummingbirds readily come to sugar water. And the important thing is, if you do offer sugar water, make sure you clean out your feeders regularly, every few days, especially if it's really hot in July. But they will come by the drove sometimes and stick their long beak in. Their tongue extends out then, and it forms a little hollow tube, which they suck up the nectar, the sugar water in this case. With the ruby-throated the male, by the way, you only see the red on certain angles of light. It's called iridescence. And in some angles, it looks black, but if the right angle comes back to your eye, it's a brilliant red coloration. A number of years ago, at White Lake, not too far from our area, or in our area, actually, there was this clever hummingbird that thought, I'll make my nest close to the food source. So I built a nest on top of the hummingbird feeder. Major problem, though. The woman couldn't fill it up because she couldn't take the top off with the hummingbird nest there. So the plan that seemed to be a good plan didn't work out very well for the bird. A little closer view of that nest. Now, a lot of you have trees in your backyard, and some trees might get aged and develop cavities inside, or have cavities created by woodpeckers. These are really important sites to have in a backyard. And if you have an older tree, let it be, unless, of course, it poses a threat to the house or to some building. But these are fantastic cavities. That's a northern flicker, a male that built this cavity. If you have an older tree, you might get a pileated woodpecker, once so rare in our area, but now pretty common. And they have become pretty regularly seen in the urban center as well. Now they'll make a nest in a tree, and then the next year probably make a brand new hole somewhere else. And if a hole becomes vacant, it's like an apartment ready for rent. And a number of animals will take advantage of that. One being a very small owl called the northern saw-whet owl that's found in our area. They're only the size of your hand. And these will go to woodpecker holes or natural cavities in the tree. And they do prefer, in the wild at least, potted woodpecker cavities. Most woodpeckers make a round hole in a tree when they make a nesting hole, but pottieds have this characteristic little notch on the top, more of a heart shape. Eastern screech owls, another small owl that nests in cavities in trees. Even gray tree frogs will spend their daytime hours inside a cavity, coming out at night to feed. So these cavities are really important things to have. By the way, gray tree frogs, when they're not in a cavity, can be really hard to see in your trees because you can change their color and their patterns blend in so perfectly with the colors and patterns on the tree, whether it's lichens or mosses. You know, the greens just match the lichens perfectly. Wonderful frogs with gray tree frogs. And out of those cavities at night, by the way, often come northern flying squirrels. In the Pembroke area, by the way, we have two species. The southern flying squirrel comes at times as far north as Pembroke. Southerns are the size of a chipmunk, while northerns are the size of a red squirrel. And the tails are a bit different, and their bellies are a bit different too, but it's hard to see at night. If you have larger cavities, you might have raccoons poking their heads out of them. And of course, raccoons aren't always welcome in our backyards, are they? Because if you have an attic that they can get into, they can get in and they will get in, and they aren't very nice in terms of what they do to the insides of the attic. But nonetheless, they are wild animals, and if they're not in your attic and in the backyard, they're nice to have. By the way, the paws of a raccoon are remarkable. On the bottom of the paw are hundreds of sensory cells. And that's why they grope so much, and they seem to wash their food, but they're feeling their food, analyzing their food. And especially at night when they're out being active, the paws are always touching things, sending to the brain messages about what they're feeling and is it edible or not. Now, there are natural cavities, but of course we can create cavities too that attract birds especially. And so birdhouses and backyards are great substitutes for natural cavity. If you have a small hole, maybe you'll entice a house wren to use it. A larger hole might attract a larger bird. And if you're lucky, it might be an eastern bluebird if you're near fields. Or the next image, I think, is a female bringing food to the nest. Here she comes. Or more likely, maybe a tree swallow. And I can recall in the early years, Pembroke was famous for having thousands of swallows in the fall come to roost in certain trees by the Muskrat River. And unfortunately, those days are done. You still have some swallows here, but not those glory days which put Pembroke on the map. But many of those swallows that were here were tree swallows, which have beautiful iridescent blue or bluish green on their bodies. They've declined sadly over the years, and one reason appears to be that many birds that feed on flying insects, like swallows and nighthawks and whippoorwills, are declining dramatically, and chimney swifts, because the food they feed on is becoming scarce too. And there are a number of reasons being put forward for this, one being insecticides we're using and killing off the insects that they depend on for their survival. You can have a single birdhouse with one hole, or you can have an apartment building. And if you have an apartment building and live near water, you might get purple martins, which are a beautiful swallow. The males are much more colorful than the females. They're really beautiful purple color, rare in birds. And they return fairly early in spring. The males come first, trying to find a colony. They'll attract other females and males to it. And then they have a colony set up. And by the way, the first males back are the dominant males. And it turns out they'll choose the highest spot in that colony for themselves. And then when they attract other members of the colony, they'll go visit the other females in the colony and produce young through them. And so not only do they have their own family they've created with their mate, but they spread their genes around a little bit. Pretty crafty birds, these purple martins. And by the way, they have an intriguing behavior. They'll go to trees and rip off live leaves and fly back to the nest with these leaves and put them inside the nest. And when these leaves start decaying, they have a natural insecticide inside them that keeps out things like blowflies that may lay their eggs in there and bother the young nestlings. A number of birds that nest in cavities do just this. They add insecticides. By the way, if you have a martin house up, you might attract a house sparrow as well. And these are non-native birds that were released in New York City in the 1850s or 60s, and they've spread widely through North America. And they use cavities for nesting too, and they will use our birdhouses in our backyards. But they're also declining too in numbers, and no one knows really why. They used to be so common, and now they're actually getting hard to find. And obviously, house sparrows can't read. And that's one reason why when they arrived here, they were despised by many people because they took over cavities used by bluebirds and other native species. But they're just doing what they do naturally. They put their nest inside a cavity. As does another non-native bird, a European starling. Starlings also arrived here courtesy of humans. They were brought deliberately to New York City in the 1890s, I believe, and released because the British people who were settling in New York were homesick. And they thought it'd be a great idea to bring over all the birds in Shakespeare's plays, like Starling and Sparrow, and let them go and make them feel more at home. And so these birds are brought here. Several times they were released in numbers, and they've done really well in spreading through North America. Now, I don't even know much about starlings, but besides nesting in cavities, they are a famous bird because a famous composer was very fond of them. Mozart actually had a pet starling that he loved. And he loved the songs it sang, loved the appearance, and loved that bird so much when it died, he actually had a funeral procession in his backyard for it with famous people there, including politicians, to bury his starling. And then he wrote a composition for it. Can you imagine that? And when I thought about this, I found it intriguing because that means while Mozart was composing, his starling was decomposing. How about that? Anyway, I'll carry on. Some people get carried away, by the way, with nest boxes, trying to get bluebirds. And if you swamp the tree swallows with enough boxes, you'll probably get bluebirds too. Actually, by pairing up the boxes, putting too close together, if you have bluebirds near your area, if you're in a rural area, have bluebirds, they'll use one box and tree swallows in another, because tree swallows will not tolerate tree swallows beside them, but they will tolerate bluebirds. Another way of getting more nature in your backyard, of course, is through feeding birds in winter. And our winter here is almost done, but there still are birds at feeders. And sometimes we have American goldfinches here in huge numbers, but we always have residents like chickadees and here a downy woodpecker that will come. And I see a common red pole down here at this feeder as well. We don't have certain things like Canada jays very often, but occasionally they'll come in. But these are birds that are near the Pembroke area that store their own food. But black-capped chickadees, of course, are ones that we'll have at our feeders. Now, this year was huge for common red poles, wasn't it? For some of you at least. And they're stunning little birds that the feathers start wearing off the breast in late winter, and that red color is already there at the base of the feathers. So as we approach spring, which we're doing now, male red poles are getting quite red in the breast. This winter was a huge winter for the most northern red pole called the Hoary Red Pole. And these appeared in pretty good numbers all through the Ottawa Valley. They've got a smaller bill generally than a common red pole does. Very, very pale all over their entire plumage. And when their feathers wear for the males, it's not red beneath, but a slight bit of pink. But a very white looking red pole with a small bill and a wash of pink is definitely a hoary red pole. And there are lots this winter. Now, if you put out seeds, you'll attract different kinds of birds based on the kind of seed. There are some birds that go for small seeds in the wild, often on things like plants we call weeds. They'll eat those small seeds, and they'll go to finer seeds like millet and a Niger. That's an American tree sparrow. So here's a Niger feeder, and we have a dark-eyed junco here and an American tree sparrow. So in the wild, these go for small seeds. When they go for bird feeders, it's generally small seeds as well. Larger seeds like striped sunflowers get the bigger billed birds that can deal with them, like the evening grosbeaks. We haven't had as many grosbeaks in recent years, a slight increase in numbers, and that's because in summer the young are fed spruce budworm caterpillars. And unfortunately, spruce budworms eat the needles of coniferous trees that are considered valuable for the forestry industry, and they spray large areas of the boreal forest to kill off spruce budworm caterpillars. And in doing so, they disrupt the natural cycles where the predatory birds like evening grosbeaks and certain warblers like bay-breasted in Tennessee and Cape May that feed on those caterpillars and produce more young per year when there's lots of caterpillars are the natural controls for them, and that they're being not eliminated, but reduced in numbers because of our spraying programs. Bird feeders are the reason we have cardinals in Ontario. They are not found in Ontario, they're much farther south, until about the early 1900s. And they appeared down by Windsor and spread north gradually because they don't really migrate, but they depend in winter on natural food, or in our area, more on bird feeders. And they love sunflowers. There's a female here. Again, notice that large bill used for shelling seeds and then swallowing the inner part of the seed. And I saw a weird behavior a couple of years ago, unrecorded, and that's a bird using a tool, a cardinal using a tool. Now, some birds use tools to get food. There's a Caledonian crow, and the Galapagos finch can use little twigs to pull things out. But watch what this cardinal did. It had a very special tool indeed. It used a chickadee to get smaller seeds. Now, I'm pulling your leg. I made that up. I just thought it was a very funny looking sequence that I photographed one time. Anyway, you can offer seeds for seed-eating birds in small and large seeds. You can offer suet, either a pseudo suet made from peanut butter and lard, or the real suet you get from a butcher shop. And that'll attract birds like chickadees and downy woodpeckers and hares and so on that go for grubs inside wood. Because fat is the fat we use for suet, the suet fat is the same pretty well for content as the fat on grubs, insect grubs, that these birds are after in wintertime. So here's a downy woodpecker. How about a white-breasted nuthatch? And in recent years, with climate change and warmer winters usually, we have a southern woodpecker expanding northward, now nesting near Arnprior and Ottawa, and probably, if not already, soon in the Pembroke area. It's called the Red Bellied Woodpecker, which is a really stupid name. This bird is stunning. It's more of an orangey red head, beautiful striped zebra-like back. But where's the red belly? It's a little bit of wash down here that you rarely see. Stupid name, worst named woodpecker in the world is the red-bellied, but maybe coming to your backyard if you feed birds all winter long. And if you keep feeding birds until spring, you'll see the American goldfinch change their color from their olive green winter plumage to their striking yellow and black for the males. And you'll see returning indigo buntings perhaps come into your feeder as well if you offer the small seeds. So the kind of seed you offer will change as the season progresses. Now, of course, birds coming to feeders attract their predators, a very natural thing. And we have birds like Cooper's hawks coming in to feed on mourning doves or blue jays. The smaller versions, the sharp-shinned hawk, that will feed on blue jay size as well, if you're a female sharpie, which is bigger than males, or in smaller birds. So you got a whole activity going on at feeders, not just the birds you've drawn in by the food you're offering, but other birds coming in as well. And in recent years, the merlin, a small falcon, has become more common, and it's now being seen in backyards, and some over winter as well now, to feed on birds in the backyard. And by the way, here it's showing its great talons for capturing prey. And look at those great, great talons here. I guess you would call this hunter a talented hunter, right? Anyway, merlin, one of the small falcons. Anyway, feeding birds is a really popular pastime, and it's a great way of seeing birds in the backyard. And by the way, people also often wonder, are we keeping birds behind that would migrate? And if we stop feeding, will they die? Well, No, the answer is no to that. Because first off, birds that are staying for the winter are doing so because their natural foods are around, or if they're northern birds, are coming down to look for natural foods. If the natural foods aren't here, our native birds go south and the northern birds keep going through. But if we have natural food around, like birch seeds for goldfinch, they'll go to feeders in. If there's no birch seeds, they keep on migrating. Same for red poles. If there's not a lot of weed seeds around, they keep on going. But generally, if they come this far south, they find food, and then we're lucky we have them at our feeders. So here's common red poles here, and look at a little hoary here as well that snuck into the frame. Anyway, backyards are dynamic habitats. And people who think they have to go far afield to see nature have got it wrong. There's as much going on in a backyard as there is in a really wild area. Sure, the species can be different. We don't get, polar bears in our backyards unless you're way up north in Northwest Territories or whatever. And you won't get opossums in our area here. But we do have a whole set of animals, mostly small, that do appear in backyards and make it a really interesting area to explore. And especially look for the small animals. People assume that bigger is better. Not the case. Small wild animals like butterflies and their caterpillars or beetles and so on have intriguing life histories that are just as complex and often more fascinating, more bizarre than those of bigger animals. So enjoy your backyard and do appreciate all the different visitors you will have, whether it's considered a nuisance animal like a raccoon or a more beautiful animal like a butterfly. But backyards are important. I hope all of you enjoy your backyard and see many of these organisms that visit us on a regular basis. Thank you. Okay, I guess, Sarah, you can come back on now.
Thanks so much, Michael. That was an awesome presentation. Lots of beautiful pictures in there. Does anybody on our live chat have any questions for Michael? I know there's a little bit of a delay between our Zoom call here and YouTube. But I have one. Michael, what's your favorite piece of nature in your backyard?
I like everything the same. It's funny. I enjoy seeing a really neat caterpillar as much as seeing a larger animal that's more elusive somewhere else. I can't say I have a favorite. No, they're all my favorites. And years ago, I stopped trying to choose a favorite animal because it's the flavor of the moment where, at that moment, this is my favorite animal I've ever seen in my life. And then I'll see something else. Oh, that's my favorite animal. And it goes on, it never stops. And, and that's the beauty of looking closely at any habitat, whether it's a big habitat like a cattail marsh or a backyard garden. You'll see new things on a regular basis. And the more you look, the more you learn to observe. I think it was Sherlock Holmes who stated that, you see, but you don't observe. And that's a really important thing when it comes to nature, that, you can look, but you don't see. And there's so much in nature that's subtle and hidden. But when you learn to look properly, a whole world opens up before you. And it's just as intriguing as any mystery movie or, action movie or whatever. There's so much going on that captivates you and stimulates you intellectually.
Very true. Duncan Noble says we had a red-bellied woodpecker at our feeder in Killaloe this winter.
Oh, fantastic.
Lots of thank yous and lots of great presentations. Duncan also said we had lots of pine goosebeaks at our feeder this winter.
Oh, pine grosbeaks. Yeah, that's interesting because pine grosbeaks, 30, 40 years ago, it was unheard of having any at the feeders at all. But pine grosbeaks come down from the north. They're very northern birds up in northern Hudson Bay lowland region. And when they come down, they come in flocks usually. And the flocks often have young birds in. Now, young pine grosbeaks look just like female pine grosbeak. They're hard to tell apart. So it could be adult females with young birds. You can't really tell visually, but they see other birds going to feeders. And once a pine grosbeak learns to go to the feeder, it passes that on indirectly because other pine grosbeaks see it doing that. It's a learned behavior. And starting about 40 years ago, we started to see the odd pine grosbeak at a feeder, really big news. In the last 10 to 15, 20 years, it's become regular now. And so this species has learned, as all other species have, that bird feeders offer a good source of food. You think about it, all the birds we have coming here, we take for granted, have learned that we offer food to them. Whether it's a black-capped chickadee or an American goldfinch or a common red pole or a pine grosbeak, it had to learn. And the learning had to be passed through the whole population. And that's happened with pine grosbeaks in our, well, you're too young probably, sorry, but in the older folks' lifetime, we've seen this transition from a bird that only eat natural wild foods to learning that bird feeders also have a similar substitute for them as well. That's a neat observation, Duncan.
Yeah, it's very cool. Colleen says, put up a new bird feeder with mixed wild bird seed. Chickadees came after a few weeks, but not every day. How can I attract birds?
Well, suet is good if you can get some suet. And so go to a butcher shop. I'm not sure if you're near an independent, but they often have really cheap suet, like the cheapest you can buy possibly. It used to be free when I was young at butcher shops, not anymore. They've learned that they can sell it at a high price. But if you don't want to buy suet, you can make suet out of peanut butter and lard. And if you go online for a recipe, it's usually a cup of peanut butter, a cup of lard, and then 2 cups of cornmeal, 2 cups of quick oats, a little bit of I guess, flour, not much, a little bit of flour to thicken it. And you melt the peanut butter and lard in the microwave, and then mix it with the dry stuff, mix it up really good, mix the dry stuff separately, then add your liquid to it. And I always throw raisins in and maybe a few seeds as well, and make your own cakes. You can buy those cakes in the store, but those are terrible usually, and they're not real suet. But if you make it out of peanut butter and lard, as I do, or you get real fat, the birds will come to it and they'll love it. That's one way of doing it. Often those mixed seeds, they have a lot of filler in there that the birds don't really eat. And so I always find it's maybe better to buy pure seed, like buy pure sunflowers, and like the black oil sunflower is a very universal one that many birds, even the smaller billed birds, will go for. And the big striped is good for the really big ones, but the small black oil sunflower seeds are general for most birds. And for the ground, for the other birds that feed on the ground, the sparrows especially, I put white millet down, or cracked corn's nice too. And cracked corn's really cheap. And cracked corn will attract mourning doves too. So I think offering a mixture of foods, put some on the ground, especially the cracked corn, and if you have white millet, and others in the feeders, that's the best way. And certainly suet is a great way of, or pseudo suet is a good way of attracting a certain kind of bird too. And also where you put the feeders as well. Birds like to be close to cover. And so it's good to have your feeders placed maybe, within a certain short distance from trees so they can fly into for shelter, and that makes them feel more comfortable too.
Good to know. I have the same problem. I only have a couple chickadees who come to my feeder, but would love to see more. So.
Well, this winter too, by the way, has been a tough winter where a lot of our birds have migrated south. So we have fewer birds here that would go to feeders. And for many people, not just in Pembroke area, but Killaloe, but further south as well, people are saying, I've had my feeders filled all winter. Hardly any birds are coming. If they're lucky, red poles came in. But apart from that, no, it's been a winter where there's been fewer birds than usual at feeders. So it may not be your problem. It may just be a problem where the natural food wasn't around. And many of the birds, like the nuthatches or even chickadees, which will migrate down to the northeastern coastline, especially Massachusetts, just didn't stay around this winter. There are some, but not as many as usual. And the woods are really quiet. In all my years of looking at birds, which are many, I have never seen the woods quieter than this winter. And that just means a lack of natural food. And these things are cyclic. Maybe next year will be a bumper year and we'll have many more birds here in winter, and then more at your feeders too.
hopefully. Let's see here. We have a couple people here who say they've seen barred snowy owls on a couple different occasions.
Barred owls. I should have had a picture of a barred owl, and I even thought about that. But this has been a year where I have seen more barred owls than probably any previous winter, and I've heard of more being seen. And on social media, there are so many photographs of barred owls going up, especially near backyard feeders. And what's happening is it's a low year for seeds in the wild. And that means a low year for small mammals like deer mice and white-footed mice, things that owls prey upon. Barred owls aren't really migratory. They tend to stay year-round in the habitat. But if food is low, they will move, and they will move farther south in search of food. And if they happen to go through a backyard where there's seeds from bird feeders on the ground attracting mice at night, they will hunt then. And I think all their barred owls we're seeing is a sign they are food stressed. And if they're lucky, they'll catch something near a feeder. But I know at my feeders, there's very few small mammal tracks, even coming to the seeds that are available there. So it's a tough year. In fact, I had a fisher coming. At the previous place we lived was near Huntsville. And we had a fisher coming for the last few weeks on a regular basis. And he was eating cracked corn on the ground and hunting in general. And I think it's another sign there's not a lot of food out there in terms of natural food for them. And so if they happen to go through a backyard and there's small mammals being attracted to a feeder, they may get lucky there as well.
Yvonne says, is it a problem leaving cracked corn on the ground in case it goes moldy?
Well, that's a good question. Generally, birds will not eat bad food. And so if there is some contact with moisture and it starts going moldy, they should avoid that. But what can be done is to make a little table feeder of some sort. It could be a piece of plywood or something, and put the cracked corn on top. And usually what happens is if the birds aren't eating, the squirrels certainly will, and it will be cleaned up in no time at all. But yeah, on the ground itself, where moisture can get at it, that's not the best thing. To put something the seed can go on, and just create a little table feeder on a piece of plywood even, and some sort of base on it, and that solves the problem of the seeds getting wet and moldy.
Kathy would like to know, when is the best time to put out a hummingbird feeder?
Now, they come back usually about the middle of May. And when they come back, there aren't many flowers to get nectar from. The first one to flower, though, that they do go to is red. That's the columbine, and that's a good source for them. But what's intriguing is when they first come back, one of their main foods, especially in Pembroke area and a bit farther north, is the sap inside trees that's being accessed by sapsuckers, yellow-bellied sapsuckers. They drill holes in trees to get the sap. And hummingbirds in the early spring will go to those. If you want to see a fantastic theater, natural theater, go to a sapsucker tree. And you'll see these rows of holes. They're quite distinctive, often in birch. And the sapsucker will feed there regularly, and it keeps the holes open so the sap doesn't coagulate. It keeps flowing. But it attracts hummingbirds. It attracts butterflies, flies, wasps, bees. I've seen chipmunks, red squirrels at them as well, licking the sap coming out. These are dynamic theaters, and I've spent up to 8 hours in a day just sitting and watching a sapsucker tree. It's the best theater out there, and it's free, totally free. Anyway, starting in mid-May, and if you keep your hummingbird feeders in the fall as long as possible, you often, well, I shouldn't say often, you sometimes get a surprise, because in nature, there's always these genetic variations in species and individuals, and some birds have the wrong migration pattern hardwired, the young birds. So instead of flying, say, southwest from here, they go northeast and die. Same for down south. You have birds in Arizona, most of them go south, some go north. Hummingbirds, almost every year in Ontario, somebody has a feeder going late into the fall, and they get a hummingbird there that looks a bit different than a ruby-throated hummingbird. And almost always it's a young, immature hummingbird, but it could be from British Columbia, it could be from Arizona, or sometimes even South America. And a couple of years ago, there was an Anna's hummingbird, first in Ontario ever, at a feeder in the Bruce Peninsula, came from British Columbia or California. There was one in Carleton Place before that. No, there was Calliope was in the Bruce. It was an Anna's, I guess, at Carleton Place. So you never know. But of course, these birds are doomed. And once you start getting sub-zero temperatures, the hummingbird feeders freeze up. Some people try to put heaters on them and so on, or bring them in at night, bring them in the morning for the birds. And that's nice, but it doesn't really help the bird. It sustains its life for a bit longer, but it's doomed anyways because it had the wrong, migration pattern wired in. But that's the way nature is nature is not cruel, nor is it kind. It's just nature, just natural. But so you start your feeders in mid-May, and then if you can keep them going right into the fall. Hummingbirds will leave by the end of August, early September usually, but you might get a stray coming in. And if you get a stray hummingbird coming in, call me, collect, and I'll come and see it.
Sharon wants to know, is it true that you shouldn't buy the hummingbird syrup with the red dye in it?
I haven't heard of it being a real problem because the food coloring, I don't think has anything nasty in it, but you don't need it. You can make your own sugar water. It's like 1 part sugar and 4 parts water, so 1 in 5. And it's cheaper that way, and you don't have to have any red coloration. The feeders themselves usually have red on the fake flowers that draws the birds into it. So you can save yourself some money and not buy the pre-made sugar water. If you're concerned about it, just make your own. It's the same stuff, and it's probably healthier.
Awesome. And one more question. Sarah says, we take our kindergarten class for a walk every afternoon and have been observing squirrels, chipmunks, and all winter. We are moving towards birds. Any tips on birding with children?
Absolutely. 2 tips. Here's a big one. And it's a call you can produce yourself to attract small birds in close. And for children, it's magical. For adults, it's magical. It's called pishing or spishing. And it works on this theory. When a small bird comes across a roosting owl, say there's a small owl, a little saw-whet in a cedar tree, along with a chickadee, it'll see it and know intuitively that it might eat that chickadee at night when the owl is hunting. So it starts to give alarm calls at the owl. Those alarm calls are special frequency alarm calls that are low frequency, and they tell other chickadees that danger is here. But it's a danger that is safe to be near in daytime because the owls hunt at night. So the chickadees hear this call and they'll come in, attract more chickadees. And other birds have keyed into this, like a nuthatch, for example, or a woodpecker. And you get a number of birds coming in to look for this owl, and they will harass it until it finally flies away, making it safer at night for them. So that's the theory. But anyways, if you make these alarm calls or similar alarm calls, you'll attract small birds in. So here's how you do it. All you do is go to a nice looking spot with some trees and that around and a chance of seeing birds. You may see none or hear none, but do this. And keep doing it. Have the kids do it. And after a couple of minutes or even sooner, you should start seeing birds coming into it. And it's magical. And that's how birders often see so many birds and different types of birds, because they use that tool to attract them. So again, it's called pishing, and it's just going psh, 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 repeatedly. Psh, 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 psh. That's one call that's generic and works on most small birds and works on warbirds in springtime and so on. It's fabulous. The other call is a little more difficult. It's called squeaking, and it can help attract birds, but it also will attract hawks and owls and mammals that hunt. It'll attract foxes, coyotes, weasels, including mink, long-tailed, short-tailed weasel, fisher, martin. I've called them all in with this. And it's done by loudly kissing or sucking on the back of your fingers. It makes a squealing sound that sounds like an injured animal. Predatory animals are opportunists, and if they think they have an easier meal to capture, they'll come into it. And I'm not exaggerating, but over the years, I learned when I was about 12 years old how to do this. And so I've sort of refined it over the years. But I've called in, and I'm not exaggerating, hundreds of owls, hawks, foxes, coyotes, even wolf pups one time. It's just a magical thing. So squeaking is called squeaking, or pishing, much easier to do, are guaranteed to not only keep the kids captivated, but when they see the birds coming in, it's a whole new world for them. And they themselves may become, people that use those tools as they get older.
Yeah, so Sarah, if you're still watching, if you do that with your class, send us a video to the recreation department. We'd love to see you guys enjoying your nature in your backyard.
Yep.
I think that's it for questions on here. Just to do a double check here. Yeah. Thank you so much for the presentation tonight. I know a lot of people said they learned a lot, and it was a great presentation.
Good. Excellent. Well, my pleasure, Sarah.
And I hope to have you back soon.
Absolutely. And good luck to everybody out there with your backyard nature. Goodness. So